fun. This is where my facilitator in me comes out, and I want to be like, clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Thank you, Fiona. Hi, everyone. I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Turkos. My pronouns are they, them. I am a very proud Winooski resident. I'm very proud to sit on the Winooski City Council. I also coincidentally am running for Chittenden-21 for the State House. But I'm really grateful, probably will cry tonight, I am a Pisces. The real sort of reason why I wanted to be here is because, I'll just put a massive content trigger warning on this evening. I'm a multiple sexual assault survivor, and I am a survivor of kidnapping. And I have been inside of the criminal legal system. I do not call it the criminal justice system, but I have been inside of the criminal legal system for years. And I have been inside of the policing system also for quite a long time. And I think particularly as a survivor, I will identify as someone who just has been inside of those systems for my entire life. And so I was born and raised in Vermont. I was born and raised in Chittenden County. I'm from Underhill originally. And I have always been a massive fan of Sarah's. I know the first time that I really sort of like interacted with her, she came across my desk, was when a film came out about you. And I was supporting a group of survivors who are currently in active litigation against the University of Vermont in a Title IX lawsuit because of the way that they are the university has mishandled their sexual assault allegations. And myself and a survivor drove down to Montpelier, where there was a screening of the film. And it was just incredible to see someone, at that point in time, full disclosure, I really struggled with the term progressive prosecutor. I was very much inside of the policing system. I did not believe that a progressive prosecutor was a real thing, because I had not experienced that firsthand. But Sarah's film the film about Sarah, really opened my eyes to the idea that my experience is not mine alone. And so then when I moved back and my wife and I bought our house in Winooski and I really built a life here, I was really intrigued by the way that Sarah moves through the world and her leadership. And so when I decided to run, I knew that when I was running my own campaign, I didn't want to do like traditional campaign events. It's just not who I am. So you won't hear Sarah and I do like a stump speech tonight. You won't hear us say to you why we think that you should vote for us. At least I don't plan to do that. The thing that we're really going to do is to hold space for conversations that I know I love to have. And I feel confident saying conversations that Sarah loves to have, which are conversations that are rooted in true justice, in true healing, in true community. Conversations that I wish I had had access to as a victim and a survivor when I was inside of the system. And so, yeah, I just want to sort of like lay that groundwork there. A few just like housekeeping rules. Sarah and I are currently holding live mics. I wanted this to be as accessible as possible to our community. Some folks couldn't be here for a plethora of reasons. And so Town Meeting TV has graciously lent us this camera and these two mics in front of us. And so this mic is not live, but is live for recording. And so you will not be recorded, but just know that like we are recording this for our entire community for you to share later. And there's a bathroom right here if anyone needs anything. I have placed some pins and buttons and stickers on everyone's table. Those are free for you to take. I have lots of extras, so if they're not there, I can give you more. And then there are little sheets of white scrap paper, because we hate waste in our house, and so maybe it's a good thing I didn't bring index cards. And so if you have a question or a topic that you want Sarah and I to discuss tonight, Bronwyn, who is in the back in an amazing pink t-shirt, will be collecting those, and you can just raise that piece of paper. Bronwyn will come and grab it and deliver it to me. And so, yeah, I think that's sort of just like laying the groundwork for tonight. And so I'm going to let, do you want to introduce yourself or do you want me to go? Okay, I'm going to let Sarah introduce herself and then we'll sort of dive in a little bit more.
Amazing. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah George. I am the Chittenden County State's Attorney, but I also am from Vermont. I grew up in central Vermont and Quechee, went to Hartford High School, and actually moved up to Chittenden County in 2007. I bought my first home in Winooski, so very excited to be back here. I came up here and then about 2 weeks later found out that I was accepted into law school in South Royalton. So commuted from here, spent a lot of time in this community and really, really grateful to be back having this conversation. I became a prosecutor straight out of law school about 15 years ago. Been in the Chittenden County office ever since, and been the state's attorney since 2017. I will, just because Al mentioned it, Dwayne and Jennifer are here, who actually produced and directed the film To Be Fair, which was done about me in my 2022 election. Yes. And the reason I mention it, not just because they're here, but also because that film, I think a lot of people had that same interaction with the film. And so if you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. It's only like 22 minutes, which is a great way to take in a lot of information these days. But I'm really excited to be here. I think that a lot of the conversation about progressive prosecutors and a lot of the conversation that's happening right now in my contested primary uses victims as a sort of tool against progressive prosecution, when actually, from my perspective, the opposite is true. So anytime the conversations can actually be with victims, about survivors from their perspective, I'm super grateful to be here. And with how many people in the audience I see that work in restorative justice, I know for sure that they agree. So there's a lot of campaign events. I'm most excited about this one because I think it's really at the heart of why I do the work I do.
Yeah. I don't even know that the filmmakers were in the room, so I love that. So the way that tonight is basically going to go is I have a few questions for Sarah, and then we're going to spend the majority of the time really focused on the audience, or what I'm going to call community questions that you all submitted. And because there is a pretty small group of us, I do want to acknowledge that, like, if someone wants to get up, sometimes I get nervous about a hot mic in a situation like this, but I feel pretty confident no one's going to like tell me that what happened to me was my fault. And so, I just want to say that, like, this is a safer and supportive space. And so, I think the first question that I had for Sarah, and that I think can happen so often in prosecutorial spaces, is what criticism of your office has genuinely changed the way that you lead?
So interestingly, I think that the response is actually that the way that I lead is what has led to the criticisms of my office. I think that when I became state's attorney, I really didn't expect to become state's attorney. I was appointed initially and had no political background, had no political aspirations. And so I figured I was gonna have the position for 2 years. And so I was like, I'm gonna do everything I can in these 2 years to, like, just blow it all up. And so in my very first interviews, I was talking about, like, the foundation of our legal system being built on the oppression of Black and brown people and poor people, and being that it's not a broken system, that it's actually doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to over-police and over-prosecute and over-incarcerate anybody who kind of challenges the white status, class, or racial status in our communities. And that was, I think, a bit of a shock for a lot of people to hear a prosecutor saying that. And the initial response from so many people was like, why don't you become a defense attorney? If that's how you feel, become a defense attorney. And my response was, I've been a prosecutor for 7 years because I believe that this is where good can happen. And to ignore the foundation of our legal system is disingenuous and actually causes significantly more harm in our communities. So I think the criticisms were quick. The moment I got labeled a progressive prosecutor was the moment I got a target on me. Nationwide, I mean, people came out of the woodworks nationwide to come for me from the moment I started talking honestly about the system. So I don't want to say that I haven't changed anything, because certainly with every big thing that happens, I am always wondering if I could have done it a little differently. But until I am not in this position, those criticisms will come. Mm-hmm. And I don't see anything I could do that would be true to my values and my morals that would stop those criticisms. And so I just continue to think, well, I'm still here. And as long as I'm still here, I'm going to continue to lead with honesty and transparency about how harmful our system is, and do my best from within it fix it?
I love this answer. I think also for me, so like the TLDR, the too long didn't read of my story is I was kidnapped at gunpoint in 2017 by a Lyft driver in New York City and taken across state lines to New Jersey, and then was sexually assaulted by him and at least 2 other men. And I had been sexually assaulted twice before, once in high school, once in college. And I did not report or tell anyone, my parents, anyone about my 2 prior sexual assaults. And in 2017, it was very violent. I had a lot of physical bruising, etc. So I reported to the police. I had a rape kit done, etc. And the New York City Police Department, like, categorically was negligent. They they did not investigate, right, my what happened to me. They lost a lot of video evidence. There was just a lot of like absolute negligence and malfeasance on their part. And so then I had a thought, and this relates back to what Sarah said, is that at that point in time, I still identified as cis. I had not come out as a non-binary individual, but I was queer, and knew the immense amount of privilege that I held. Because I knew that the majority of people who report sex crimes in the city of New York, right? Many people have seen the show Law & Order SVU. It is not that. And so I knew that it was a way, to quote a favorite person of mine, Brittany Packett Cunningham, for me to spend my privilege. And so what I started to do is I started to speak really, really publicly about my experience with the NYPD, what had happened to me, what their negligence had looked like, and then I made the decision to file a lawsuit against the NYPD. And it was a landmark lawsuit. And one of the things that happened during that time was that I learned that, as Sarah's saying, oftentimes these systems want to exhaust people out of existence, right? You're constantly filing paperwork. You're constantly following up with detectives, with lieutenants. It became my second job, my second full-time job. And so the thing that I really identify with Sarah and what you're saying is that for those of us, Sarah and I both are queer, for queer folks, for people who are values-oriented, for people who, I would say my queerness is not just my sexuality, it is my politic. And I am rooted, the work that I do is rooted not only in my own liberation, but most often in the liberation of everyone else around me. And so I think sometimes the term progressive prosecutor can be thrown around. And people can say, John is a progressive prosecutor, or like, I want to be a progressive prosecutor, but I think you were doing the work because of the identities that you hold, because of the values that you have. And I think someone somewhere decided to label you as a progressive prosecutor. I don't think that that is a term or a label that you sought out.
Definitely not. Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, with the term of progressive prosecutor, what do you see? Do you think it's helpful for us to call people progressive prosecutors? Do you think that people, and even like locally in our community in Chittenden County, do people get hung up on the term and not hung up on the work that you're doing?
Yes. Yes. So the reason that I think I initially got that term was because I joined a national organization invited me to be a part of their group, and they're called Fair and Just Prosecution. And it's a national organization that brings together prosecutors who are using their discretion in ways that challenge the sort of status quo of our legal system. And it started, I would say, arguably with like Kim Foxx in Chicago and Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, and then Eric Gonzalez in Brooklyn, and Larry Krasner in Philadelphia. So there's, and it grew and grew and grew. And when I first joined in 2018, I went to the first sort of convening of this group, and there was like 8 of us there. Now when I go, there's over 60 of us there. And interestingly, even though there's 2,300 elected prosecutors in the country, those 60 or so of us represent about a quarter of the country's population. So they're in really big cities doing really big things. And so I was honored to be a part of it, in a room with Kim Foxx, absolutely, like any day of the week. But I didn't, and I was grateful because in Vermont, prosecutors don't have resources for trainings and to be able, anytime we're going to a training, it's usually the same status quo. How do you get more convictions? How do you get all of this evidence in that you probably actually shouldn't get in? Like all of these conversations that I just didn't feel great about having. So to be able to be part of a group that could help me and give me the resources and the information really that I needed in order to keep this work going was super helpful. But like I said, that immediately came with this target, that this like right-wing narrative, frankly, that progressive prosecutors don't care about victims, that progressive prosecutors are the reason that crime is up, or that's really not true, or all of these narratives that come with any sort of deviation from the status quo. And that really, that was in Vermont too. And so anytime that I'm like, okay, but I get that I'm this progressive prosecutor, but also research, data, evidence, like all of these things, that's what I'm using to make these decisions. It was just like, for some folks, the second that label was there was no listening to anything else, which is incredibly unfortunate, and very much still happens, and is happening, in this primary. So it has brought me a lot of resources that the state otherwise has not been able to provide me, and it has brought a lot of criticisms and targeting with it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that can be, sorry, someone I love very much just walked in. I think one of the things that can be really hard for folks who don't understand how the criminal legal system, and particularly the carceral system, work. And I know I was talking to an incredible person earlier tonight about how so often when I tell people, so often when I tell people that I was sexually assaulted, specifically in the city of New York, the first thing that will come out of their mouth is like, I want to beat him up. I want to put him in jail. I want to kill him. And my response is like, that's really interesting. That is not at all what I want to do. And sometimes my wife and I make the joke, or my friends and I make the joke, like I need an anger translator because I have a hard time feeling that emotion. Particularly as a trauma survivor, I'm seeing a lot of validation at this table and I'm loving it. And I think for me it was, there was a part in my experience inside the policing system, particularly when it's an automatic federal offense when you kidnap someone across state lines. And so originally my case was with the Manhattan DA. At that point in time, it was still Cy Vance. Alvin Bragg had not been elected yet. And so at that point in time, it was like Al Turkos versus X. And then when the case was shifted to be in the hands of the FBI, it was the United States against this person. And I then basically had no say. And that was incredibly difficult for me because I'm like getting a little bit emotional because you're inside this system that is supposedly set up to help you and is supposedly set up to like give you access to justice. And in reality, you like basically feel like you have no rights. And so when I think of progressive prosecution, I think of like, I had prosecutors and FBI agents tell me that I needed to grow my hair out in order to be more believable. I had prosecutors and FBI agents tell me like I could not date anyone. Like I was single for 7, almost 8 years because if I dated someone, they would be put on the stand as a character witness and our potential sex life would be used against us, and to say that I was not, I was emotionally healed. And so then when I meet someone like Sarah, or when I learn about her work from this incredible film, there is this like grief and loss that I feel at the idea that like I did not have access to that, right? And I process that, shout out to therapy. And now it's like everyone in the world should have access to this type of prosecution and this type of leader. And so my very long way to sort of get to this question is the idea of like, how do you in your office and you as a leader ensure that you're working, or maybe ensure is the wrong word, but that you're working within a system to change a system, right? And so you want to ensure that you can give victims and survivors access to the justice and healing that we all know that they deserve, but sometimes that may not be accessible. And so how do you hold those multiple truths at the same time?
I feel like this is the hardest part of this job. And there's a couple of small examples of how I do this. The first is that, just as a bit of some context, is when I was first hired as a prosecutor, I was hired as the VAWA prosecutor. So I was all my cases were domestic violence. And I had been in a violent relationship in high school, and so I felt like these were different. These were a case, or a sort of group of cases that I could come in and seek convictions and seek jail and like sleep well at night because they were different, right? They were violence, and I could be their savior. And maybe like 3 months in, I was meeting with my 100th victim of domestic violence and realizing like, oh, that's actually not what any of them want. And the government has this way of co-opting conflict and then like doing what we think is best for that person and using it either way. Like, we want a conviction because that's for you. Or if you don't want a conviction, we're still gonna seek this conviction because we know better than you. And so I was learning a lot about restorative justice at the time and realized like victims didn't know it, but when I would ask them in meetings, like I stopped asking victims in the first meeting, what do you want to see happen to this person? And instead started asking them, what do you need? And that in itself is just a whole different answer. And most of them, the answer was, I want to know why this happened. I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I want like an apology or some acknowledgement that this person caused me this harm. And our legal system doesn't give victims any of that. In fact, it's the opposite. The second someone's arrested, it's like, you can't talk to this person. Then they get an attorney that says, do not talk to this person. And then their attorney spends the next 6 months trying to get them out of trouble and trying to make sure that they don't take this sort of accountability. And so I started realizing that what 98% of victims in our crimes of violence were expressing was wanting restorative justice. And restorative justice was great in Chittenden County, but it was prohibited for domestic and sexual violence cases by statute. So I started working with legislators to change that, and some of the really great folks here from Burlington Community Justice Center to change that, and we did. We kind of rescinded the law prohibiting it, and we're in the process of allowing it, or doing some training to make sure that we can do that. But in the meantime, we as prosecutors within the system have to listen to what survivors want, even if we don't think ourselves that it's the best outcome for that person. And that, I have had cases that I have dismissed because that is what a survivor has wanted, that I have lied awake at night praying I don't get the call that that person ends up dead. And that is, a really, but the flip side of that is when you do that, but you build a good relationship with the person in the meantime, and they know they can trust you, or you find that, we brought in a Burlington police officer now works in our office as our investigator to rebuild relationships with victims that a lot of law enforcement are not able to do, or frankly don't do well, so that the next time maybe they are ready. Maybe that is what they want, or maybe not. Frankly, finding ways within our system to connect victims with services, with supports, with jobs, with housing, with their own independence is often the best justice we can ultimately get for them, far more than convictions will ever do.
This leads to one of my next favorite things, which is the word accountability. And I know we talk about this a lot in my family, and I know that there are 2 young people in the room who I love so dearly, and we talk about accountability since they were, I'm seeing Finney shake his head, because we always talked about how we love, as a society, we love the term accountability, and I think predominantly since 2017 when the resurgence of the Me Too movement happened, and we had to hold everyone accountable. And we seem to forget that you cannot hold someone accountable. Accountability must be a voluntary act. And I think I've seen this in my own life, right, is that even like I attempt to model the behavior that I want to see, right? And so like I consider accountability to be a muscle that you have to flex. And so there have been moments in my life, right, it might be in my marriage, it might be with like the kids that are in my chosen and found family, it might be in my friendships, I might mess up. And someone ideally will like very gently call me in and be like, hey, Al, that wasn't great. And it is my job and my role to say, you are totally right, I'm accountable to that, and like this is the work that I'm going to do to be better. And I think about that when we talk about it on a larger scale, right? When we're talking about accountability and what that can look like, and I then want to go into talk about restorative and transformative justice, is I think we just throw these words like accountability around, and I'm wondering, like when you hear the word accountable, or when people come up to you and say like, why aren't you holding these people accountable? I don't know why that's their voice. It's like they're but like what do you think is beneath that question? Or what this is again the prices of me. What do you think they're feeling? Like what is, when they say why aren't you doing what, like where is the accountability? What do you think is really there?
Fear. I mean, I think really people, when they say, why aren't you holding these people accountable, what they mean is, why aren't you disappearing these people that are making me uncomfortable? And because if they really want to know what we're doing to hold people accountable, they'd come to court any day of the week and see what we're doing to hold people accountable. An unfortunate aspect of just our society right now is that people think that if somebody is charged with a crime but are still in our community while they're being charged with a crime, while they're presumed innocent, while they're awaiting trial, that they're not being held accountable. And what we have done so much of in Chittenden County, especially since COVID, is rebuild relationships with nonprofit organizations, with community service providers, with law enforcement, to speed up the process of somebody's accountability. Because from my perspective, the sooner you can talk to somebody about what they did, the sooner you can hold them accountable. And again, restorative justice processes and can be done pre-charge. So like before our office ever even knows about it. And the data and sort of research is really clear that the sooner somebody has intervention, the greater deterrent it is for future crime. So when somebody is, has a retail theft on Church Street, and then our office doesn't receive that paperwork for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and then their court date is a few weeks from that, and then their next court date's 3 months from that. Like, that is not being held accountable, right? People need to have that intervention fast. Accountability to me means someone acknowledging the harm they've committed and making sure that it won't happen again, which for most of the folks that we're talking about in our communities means co-occurring trauma-informed services, really deep-rooted trauma-informed therapy, substance use treatment, housing, all of their basic needs being met is accountability for me. And that's typically not really a prosecutor's job, right? It's like everybody else's job. It's legislators' jobs, like that's the wild thing to me, is the thing that has been proven to work to deter and decrease crime is meeting people's basic needs, and prosecutors don't do that historically. So we now have Howard Center in our courtroom, meeting with people when they're in court, connecting them to services, doing applications for housing, getting them immediately on contingency management, going down the hall and meeting with a service provider. Because from my perspective, not only does that make sure that people actually come to court if they think that there's something there for them, but it actually ultimately decreases the criminal behavior that they're likely to be engaged in. But I'm curious what it means for you. I mean, having been through your experience, how do you define accountability and what do you think prosecutors can do to ensure it?
I'm like, is this where I will cry? Probably. I think, like being asked this question by a prosecutor is like, oof. I think for me, it has, let me back up and say this. A lot of the work that I do right now is that I support survivors and victims who are going through the system themselves. And when a survivor comes to me and says, I want to file a lawsuit, or I want to tell my story publicly in the press, which I did very much of, and I felt very alone. And so I partner with survivors now to ensure that they never feel alone. And my first question to them is always, like, what does justice and healing look like for you? Very similar to the question, right? Like, what do you want? And I think for me, accountability focuses, oftentimes when we as a society, right, the royal we, when we think about accountability, the focus is often on the perpetrator and on, right, I hate this term of hurt people. Where so often, I think we're now in the trauma space, specifically we're trying to say healed people. And like, as someone who has really spent a lot of time healing, that is a huge focus of mine. So I think to me, the accountability is really like centering myself and really like, it was rough out there for me. And like, there were moments and times I did not think that I was gonna make it. I really struggled with suicidality. It was really hard that it was a rideshare driver, so this person had access to my home address, knew where I lived. But I think for me, it's like, if you had asked me a few years ago if I would be like sitting on a stage, like running for office, in like an amazing marriage, and like having such an amazing community, like that to me is like, accountability is less about the person and it's more about centering myself. And so I think also just like being able to feel an emotion, which like I could not do for years. And I think I just like have built this incredible family. Like there's 2 amazing kids in the back who I just like love so much. And I think, yeah, it's just, I think so often survivors, and I'm sure you experience this, we just like close ourselves off because the world has hurt us so intensely. And I really made a decision, I think, to be accountable to myself and to say, like, I'm going to choose empathy and I'm going to choose compassion. And so, this is what happens when I don't prepare an answer, guys. And so that's what I write. It's like, I just chose myself. I just chose myself over and over and over again. And I stumbled and I fell and it was messy and hard. But that's what accountability has been to me. Colleen, I love you. Thank you, my love. And so, I'm okay, but thank you. Sometimes when I get emotional, I have a very hard time receiving touch because I'm a survivor. But that's my very long-winded answer. Yeah. Is I think when people talk about accountability, they are coming from a space of fear, and they think that by holding the person who perpetrated harm accountable, it will like heal the victim or the survivor. Yeah. Where to me, the thing that I chose to do as a defense mechanism and as a healing mechanism, right? Like I sued Lyft. I made rideshare safer. If you get into a rideshare today, like there is tracking. If you go off course, like a lot of that is because of my advocacy. If someone walks into an NYPD precinct today and reports a sex crime, they are treated with more dignity and respect because of the work that I have done. The DOJ investigated the NYPD sex crimes division. But then I was like, cool, I'm gonna take a break. And I came to Vermont, and I moved in with 2 incredible kids, and we like made this beautiful family, and I met my wife, and I just like focused on myself. And I was accountable to myself. And I think for a survivor, I'll speak for myself, for me, there's so much external focus on the people who perpetrate harm, and as there should be, but like that's not for me. That is for their community, that is for their family, I don't believe it's for the carceral system. But that, for me, being accountable was just like to myself and going back to friends and family and being like, I maybe wasn't my best self. And I'm really sorry that I was using maladaptive coping mechanisms to survive.
Yeah.
And so that's my very long, unexpected answer about accountability. So.
Truly.
Thank you. Again, at the beginning I said, will I cry? And the answer is always yes.
I want to just add to that a little bit.
Yeah.
When I have a lot of, it seems like anything that happens in Chittenden County, the media is just obsessed with, right, in a way that does not happen in any other county, which in part because a lot of the media agencies are here physically, so it's easier, but also I think this target that we talked about earlier creates a lot of that. But I get emails a lot from community members who all they see is a WCAX story. And they'll email and say, I can't believe you amended this charge, or I can't believe this person isn't in jail, or I can't believe you did this. How do you think that makes the victim feel? Or like, you don't care about victims. And it's always so wild to me that that is what people think, instead of maybe that's what the victim wanted, right? Like, and then when you tell them, actually this resolution came after hours of meeting with the victim, after giving the victim the control over nothing, right? So I always want to remind people that in our office, at least, decisions are not made without consulting with victims. And that doesn't mean that every survivor is happy with the outcome of every case. There are all kinds of other ways in which the system fails victims that require, like you said, like exponential evidence, proving something beyond a reasonable doubt, when all the other side wants to do is demonize the person. And trials can often be significantly worse for victims. But to think about, like, maybe this isn't my harm. Maybe this isn't my conflict to have a say over, and maybe the people that are working in this office made this decision for a reason. But I think as a society in general, just we see these headlines and we jump to these conclusions, especially if it fits our narrative. So I would just encourage everybody, really, that when you hear any stories about this, to just not try to kind of have critical thinking about what our system actually does or doesn't do for survivors, and that maybe some of these outcomes are actually what was best for them, even if it's not a conviction and a lifelong jail sentence, which is what some of us might think was the appropriate sentence.
And I think it's because so often we love a savior complex. And whether,
Yes.
right, I remember, like, one of my favorite people in the world, Miriam Kaba, always says, you have to abolish the cop in your heart and the cop in your heart and the cop in your head. And so when we're doing, like, prison abolition work, when we are saying, right, and, like, again, are we going to abolish the police tomorrow? No. But can we have those values when we're moving forward? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think can happen is that when we're doing this work, and when we're saying, right, when we're talking about harm, and when we're saying, like, everyone should be punished and accountable and thrown in prison, again, I don't know why that's the voice for everyone, but it's to, like, really consider, like think about abolishing the cop in your heart and the cop in your head. And, like, why do you jump to that? Why do you have this, like, weird savior complex of, like, I've got to save the victim. I've got to save the survivor. I know this came up a lot when I was doing a lot of organizing work in New York City. We had a lot of advocates who would tell us, like, I'm going to be a voice for survivors. And I was like, absolutely not. I don't need a voice. I don't need someone to be a voice for me. Like, I can do this, right? We don't need someone to be a voice for the voiceless. And I think about this as someone who's, like, being a candidate right now, right? I'm not going to be a voice for Winooski. There are 8,000 people who live here. They are incredible. They all have a voice. It's about the idea that, like, how do we collectively organize our power to ensure that we are the loudest, for our needs and our wants and our desires within the State House. I'm going to move to audience questions. Bronwyn is here and can collect questions if anyone has them. Just raise them up, like you're waving your hands in the air. one of the questions I feel like we sort of approach or touched on, which is how do you approach situations where survivors' needs or wishes differ from the legal process? Thank you, my love. Differ from the legal process is designed to accomplish. And we touched on it. Is there anything else that you might want to talk about there?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say again that most of what victims express as their needs are not things that our legal system is designed to give them. And that sometimes is a victim who might come in and want a really long jail sentence for somebody with no criminal record and, is young, or that I just know the system is never going to give them that, even after trial, even after we do everything we can, that is not going to be the outcome. That's rare. Typically, it is that victims, what we're disagreeing on, or not disagreeing, but what we're unable to provide them is the things we talked about, like wanting the harm to stop, or wanting to make sure that the harm isn't going to happen again, and caring nothing about convictions, caring nothing about probation conditions, just wanting to have a conversation with a person and move forward in their lives with or without that person, a better, a healed human in our communities. And I know this didn't intend to be just a restorative justice, but I cannot say enough about the community justice centers that we have, the Burlington Community Justice Centers. They do, I think, the work that is most important for a safe and healthy community, and that has nothing to do, in fact, is sort of antithesis of our legal system. So I say often that the best thing prosecutors can do in a lot of harm in our communities is get out of the effing way and let restorative justice practitioners do the work, because they do it so much better. Victim satisfaction in a restorative justice approach is exponentially higher than the legal system, even when the legal system gets a conviction or gets incarceration or gets an outcome that maybe a victim thinks they want, exponentially higher. It focuses the victim, it centers the victim, and it allows them to have the control and the power back over their own conflict and their own harm.
I do also love this question. How do you build trust in the legal system among communities that have historically felt underserved or harmed by it?
Yeah, one thing that I grew up in central Vermont, and so the diversity and culture was really not a part of my life. And then I went to the University of Connecticut, and I was in athletics there. And so I was surrounded by people of color for the first time in my life. And I remember walking home from the gym one night, and I was with a teammate of mine who was a Black woman from Connecticut, and we were passing by a car, and we heard all the doors lock. You can hear the kind of click. And I say that I didn't hear it because I'm a white woman in Connecticut, right? But she did, and she pointed it out to me. And she said, it's really exhausting to live in a world where you're feared, even on a college campus. And that experience for me just opened my eyes a lot, and there's a slew of other examples of how I realized my own privilege and felt this desire or this obligation to use that privilege to speak up for other people. And so again, when I did my cash bail policy, or when I became the elected, talking about the things that Black and brown people have been saying for 200 years, literally 200 years they've been saying, this system oppresses us intentionally, police over police us and prosecutors over prosecute us. Being a sort of credible messenger as a white woman in these spaces has always felt like an obligation for me, and something that I take very seriously. I think more recently, as ICE has invaded our communities, I am married to a brown woman with a proud Mexican family, and it has been a constant reminder for me that this is dividing the personal with the sort of work is no longer an option. And my opponent in this race had said, "Oh, I believe in ICE out, and I believe in abolishing ICE," but that's my personal opinion. And we shouldn't, our politics or our decisions as prosecutors shouldn't be guided by our personal opinions. And if not us, then who? We are elected officials, and if not us, then who? And I also will just say, I don't have that luxury, right? I'm a queer woman married to a half Mexican, half Jewish woman. I don't have the luxury of separating those things, and neither do our communities. And the people in our communities are being targeted. Black and brown folks, poor people, people with mental health or substance use issues, and our immigrant neighbors. They're all being targeted, and they are being targeted by a profession that I am a part of. So if not me, then who? And I think, again, just being, the way that I deal with it is by being very honest about it, and just I think that historically we may have had room with our electeds, or I should say grace with our electeds, to be a little bit more moderated with our positions. I just don't think we have that luxury anymore, and I have no interest. If I need to be able to sleep at night, and if that means standing up and being really honest about what people in our community who don't look like me are facing, I'd rather lose than to moderate that in this world, especially with what we're facing right now as a community.
Yes. I love everything that they're saying. I also deeply agree with you, and I think it's, I'm 38, young-ish, and so it's one of those things that I've worked in politics my entire life, mainly with a background in abortion access, and then obviously more recently in sexual assault advocacy. And one of the things that I was sort of always told is that abortion is too controversial to be an elected official, right? And then it was when I was yelling at Joe Manchin in the basement of a Senate building, being "How are you going to vote for Brett Kavanaugh?" And it went viral on MSNBC, and everyone was "Well, you're never going to be an elected official." And now it's LOL.
Put it on my website.
It is. Yes. And I really identify with what you're saying regarding it has to be us, specifically as white people, and specifically as people who have, right, power makes me uncomfortable. However, as a city council member, I have it, as someone who's running for a seat in the state house. And so to me, it's I'm not going to treat it with kid gloves. And particularly, and I said this in the beginning, our lived experiences, and then also the people who we love, the communities in which we are a part of, inform what we do. And so to me, I remember being inside of a police precinct and them saying can you come and look at mugshots at 10 a.m. on a Friday? And thankfully, I was a program officer at an abortion rights organization, and I had the luxury to be able to do that. But I was if I was a single parent, if I had kids, and they told me this at 8 a.m. and they were can you come to the Manhattan precinct? And I was in what world would this be possible? And I would name that. I would put it in writing, right? Because then I knew that potentially, again, a million years down the line, if someone was reading our emails, I was naming it to detectives and lieutenants that this system is incredibly inaccessible to survivors and to victims, and you want us, right? You want this case to go to the DA, etc. But no one can come and do this. And I think also, I was thinking about this when you were talking about the meeting that you had with progressive prosecutors and how there were like 6 of you and others more. I think it's also very hard because it's very difficult to be the first. And I know for me, like I was the first named plaintiff in a lawsuit against a rideshare company. Everyone prior to me had been a Jane Doe. There are 14 Jane Does before me. And so being the first means that you are sort of like, I grew up with my dad like would ski in Underhill, and he'd always say like, like making the tracks or whatever it's called. I'm looking at skiers in my life. But like blazing the trail is hard, right? Everyone behind you, like the trail is made. And so I think so often for folks, right, like it is our role as people who hold more privilege to blaze the trail and to name like, this sucks and it is terrible. But imagine if we held more marginalized identities. And I've been doing this a lot. I believe, and I will be the first openly non-binary person if elected to the state house. And so like that, right? And so I'm having a lot of questions around like dress code and bathroom access and all of these things and like being misgendered constantly. And like shout out to Taylor Small and like other trans and non-binary people, right, who have been there. But it's just like being the first is difficult, but like someone's got to do it, and it's just like sign me up, I'm ready. So that's one of the things that I think so often is like, how do we use our privilege and get into those spaces and sort of like F things up? I want to be mindful of my language. Okay, the third community question is, how do you view the current criminal legal system and restorative justice pathway in Vermont, in which access to restorative justice is determined by the responsible party's pathway through the justice system, not the victim survivor's request?
Yeah, so one, just sort of to give people an understanding of how it does work, is typically when somebody commits harm in our community, the first point of contact is law enforcement. And law enforcement will respond and like hear the allegation, and then it's really initially up to them whether they send a case directly to one of our previously multiple community justice centers, but now just the Chittenden County Community Justice Center. Are we saying that yet? Okay, great. So we're consolidated all into one spot, which is excellent. And if the law enforcement officer doesn't do it, which unfortunately is a work in progress, then it comes to our office and we make that decision. And it's very often one of the first things that is taken into account is whether the person seems like or has taken accountability or responsibility for the harm. The problem with that initially is that people watch Law and Order. They know that when they talk to the police, they're not supposed to say they did it, right? They're supposed to deny. And so law enforcement will often say, well, I didn't refer it because they didn't take responsibility. The reality is that when people do that as an instinct, but when they're actually given an opportunity to take responsibility without thinking it will be used against them in a criminal proceeding, they're much more likely to do that. So, and of course we're just not quite at the place where we have law enforcement officers having that conversation with people, and frankly, like those conversations are recorded, and there's all kinds of issues that come with that. But from my perspective, the first thing is to just send all of those cases anyway. Send as many as you can, because then the amazing people at the Chittenden County Community Justice Center can have those conversations with victims. Like first and foremost, do you want to be a part of this process? I'm not sure, aside from like just people just wanting to go in and refer their own harm or their own conflict to the centers, is ever going to mean that victims are the first people to have that say. I think just the way that our system is designed, it's always going to be a police officer or a prosecutor deciding what cases go, which is super problematic. But I've had our advocates in our office are really great. They understand the benefits of restorative justice, and I've had so many emails from an advocate in my office that says, I just had this conversation with this victim. She doesn't know it, but she's describing wanting a restorative justice process. Like, is that something you're willing to do? And so then we'll refer the case. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is beautiful, because they don't know that that's what they're describing, mm-hmm. But we have an option, and we're able to give that to them. But I think that is still an issue that we're constantly sort of navigating. The other thing I would say that is problematic is that victims, we want buy-in from victims for a restorative process, and we also want the number of people and the types of cases being referred to restorative justice to be equitable. And what research really overall has seen is that white victims with Black defendants are less likely to support a restorative justice approach. So, just another added element of where race and our sort of biases come into play. And so as prosecutors, we have to figure out how to name that or how to just continue to refer those cases, even if a victim doesn't ultimately want to participate, in hopes that they'll get there, because it's important for us to make sure that the referrals are equitable and that we are not playing into the over prosecution of people because a victim is not on board with it. And that is a nationwide issue. I think we still, I don't know if anybody has read Until We Reckon by Danielle Surratt. I highly recommend it, but she runs a restorative justice program in Brooklyn called Common Justice, and it is specifically around violent offenders, I think typically younger violent offenders, with again, just significantly better outcomes for those folks and a lot of victim input.
Sarah and I had coffee last week sometime, and one of the things that we had talked about is the presence of ICE in our communities, and obviously there was a reason, actually more recently there has been multiple murders by ICE, and one of the things that Sarah and I had talked about was that it's really hard to have this conversation because oftentimes there is not a lot of local oversight, if that's the right word I want to use. And so I want to lead into this question, into this conversation. We're probably going to maybe have 10-ish minutes more because I want to leave time for Sarah and I to sort of chat with folks. But I want to, Sarah and I are obviously both not people who run away from hard things. And so I just want to name and have a conversation regarding ICE presence here. Also, one of the things that we love to say about Winooski, because it's true, is that Winooski is the most diverse city in the state. One of the things I always say as a follow-up is that we're working to become also the most inclusive city in the state. And so, yeah, I guess the question that I sort of have, and also this is a community question that we got a couple of things about, is the idea of ICE is here. They're in our country, they're in New England, they're in Vermont. I know I was at the House on the 11th. I know that my wife and I housed Jose, who's an incredible young man, and his uncle Christian, who was detained for a few weeks. They're very much in our chosen and found family. And so I guess the question is sort of what does it look like? And how hard is it to be in your position and to hold the multiple identities that you have, and to also know that what can we do?
Yeah, as you can probably imagine, this is something that I get asked all the time. Our community is understandably so beyond infuriated and angry, and I think feeling a lot of powerless in what is happening in our community. And I share a lot of that fury and anger and powerlessness, which in the position that I'm in, prosecutors and elected prosecutors have so much power. We arguably have the most power of anybody in the legal system because of our discretion and how many decisions we make that impact people's lives. And this has been an incredibly eye-opening experience for me to have this harm happening in my community that I'm watching in real time and feel so powerless. And that has followed me. I've declined to prosecute the cases that have come from VSP related to the protests around March 11th. And, all the sit-ins from the ICE detention facilities. I mean, Williston there's all kinds of facilities in Williston that are working with ICE and are actually housing ICE. But that's it's a small part, and I'm not minimizing that decision, but what we all really want is for ICE to be held accountable, right? That's what I think we all want, and it is something I cannot do. And the reason that I can't do it is twofold. I think one, it is not impossible. State prosecutors can charge federal agents with state crimes. There is nothing prohibiting us from doing that. What has been the challenge is law enforcement. We can't just do that on our own. I do need a sworn affidavit from a law enforcement officer who is alleging a particular crime has occurred against a person in our community. If I had that, I could prosecute them. But when I have a meeting next week with someone who has accumulated so many documents and a PowerPoint presentation for me and all of these amazing things that they have gone through, the 100 hours of body-worn camera and 100 hours of footage to show different ICE agents who have committed different crimes, or even, law enforcement that they think committed state crimes. And I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, because the system is designed to rely on law enforcement to bring criminal charges. And if law enforcement is unable or unwilling to do that, it leaves us with very few options. I cannot do it alone. So I think legislatively, this is something that already immediately was being talked about. I know Senator Valhofsky was immediately trying to figure out ways to be addressing this. There has to be a way for us as prosecutors to bring criminal charges against people without relying on law enforcement to do that. We do not have that. We don't have it currently, and I don't know how to do it, but I'm very committed to figuring it out, and I'm going to need, I think, legislative help to do it.
Yeah. This was an audience question that it's geared towards me, but I sort of love it because I do want to know what your answer would be. When Al wins their election, what do you think would be the first piece of legislation they should warn on the improvement of the judicial system? And so I think this question is right, is hypothetically, if I have all the power in the world, and I have some ideas, but given what you just said, right, is that it would take legislative work. I'm gonna softball it to you first. Yeah. Is what would you want to see done in the Vermont legislature?
I have a long list. Part of the criticism I get is that I make these policies that sort of cut out the legislative process, by, my office no longer seeks cash bail. We have a policy around non-public safety stop policies a presumption that we'll decline those cases, all based on very clear evidence and research that those things disproportionately impact people of color and actually don't make us any safer. And people will say, well, you should let the legislature do that. Twofold. One, I'm an elected official too, right? So why? But also, I don't have time to wait for the legislature. The legislature takes a really long time. They, as a whole body, are not representative of Chittenden County specifically. And things like that, eliminating cash bail or, addressing non-public safety stop policies or, and the harm that comes from that would take years. And I know, because I am informed, that those things are causing real harm in my community every day. So one, I just I would love for our legislative body to be able to do things quicker, which I know is a big ask. I do think addressing cash bail and instead focusing those resources, the $312, the $500,000 a day we are spending on incarcerating people in our community, I would love to see the legislature find ways to actually house and meet people's basic needs with that money, especially the people who are being held on cash bail pre-trial, which I think is about quarter to a third of our state's incarcerated population. Many, we are paying $312 a day to incarcerate somebody for less than $200 cash bail. $300 is less than a night at Hotel Vermont. Like, think about the housing that we could create for people instead of incarcerating them. So cash bail is a huge one for me. Non-public safety stops is a huge one for me. And I do think more community oversight of law enforcement, or an ability for prosecutors to initiate criminal charges without the need for law enforcement based on just sworn statements from community members, which other jurisdictions do. New York City does that. You can go into the court and write a sworn statement and a warrant gets issued, which I think is a little, I don't know that I want that, but something in between that allows prosecutors to initiate cases on their own would be huge.
I echo everything that was just said. I think also from my perspective as a survivor victim, I'm not a fan of statute of limitations. One of the things when I was working on a bill in New York State called the Adult Survivors Act, our tagline was trauma takes time. And the idea that oftentimes you don't tell someone for weeks, months, years, depending on, if you are a victim of child sexual assault or adult sexual violence. And so I think it can be very, very difficult to abolish statute of limitations. That's a conversation you and I can maybe have, but I don't think they help anyone outside of people. I don't even think it's, there's this fly who loves this. I really feel like we're Mike Pence up here, but just on a good side. But I think to me, it's really statute of limitations. And then I think it's also, I deeply agree with cash bail. And I would also say, putting on my reproductive justice lens, I would want to really think about community justice providers and community resource providers who provide abortion, who are not, Vermont is an advanced provision state. It's not just MDs who provide abortion. As I've said multiple times, the United States Postal Service is the largest abortion provider in the country. Many people don't know that. And so the idea that get rid of the Comstock Act, I'd really do some research around that. So yeah, those would be things that I really focus on, but I think it would be really overhauling statute of limitations. And yeah, that'd be a thing I would think about. I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for being here. It's 7:30, so we've got some time and we're gonna mingle. I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna hang out, I'm definitely gonna get a glass of wine. But I just wanna say, it is pretty rare to be able to hold space like this. I think particularly during a campaign season where it's I'm going to tell you this thing. Would I love for you all who live in Winooski to vote for me? For sure. But also, I believe in bodily autonomy and agency. And your body, your choice. Your vote, your choice. But I just really was so drawn to creating a safer and supportive space to have a conversation between a prosecutor and someone who has been inside of the prosecutorial system and was just had a really difficult time. And I think when you see someone who is actively creating systemic change and you know how hard it can be, I think it's so important to really highlight and to lift that up. I believe so deeply in working within the system to change a system, which is one of the reasons why I'm running. So I'm here, I'm Al, I'd love to answer questions, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming out on maybe the hottest night of the year. And just, yeah, so thank you, round of applause for Sarah, for all of you, just thank you so much.